Subscribe for a thumbs up. Alright. What are we talking about today? The male lead proposed to me. Um, you know, I read a lot just to read, really. There's time where I'm just, doing whatever and I just need something to read, and boy is this a low point. It's a 7, but it's just whatever. It's just nothing. Literally nothing. It's another one of those series where the main character is reincarnated. They, they they're in a situation where they're like the villain, right? And their sister is the female lead who gets tormented by them. So, of course, generic idea, she, decides to help the female lead. And it's so typical. So typical. There's nothing new, nothing new. um, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much just she really cares for her sister, so they kind of end up forming this bond, like this love between sisters and siblings where they, care for each other and everything, even though she's the villain. And then, most of the series is just her helping her sister because she's naive and, not able to stand up on her own 2 feet half the time. Of course, there's this idea, like, the male lead exists in this world, but she's not really that concerned with him. It's more so just, like, what is best for her sister. And there are other characters that have pretty close attachments, so it's not really like, oh, she's trying to get this girl with the male lead or whatever. It's not really that kind of story. I mean, it's more so just she wants her sister to be happy. But yes, like, she kind of, the male lead sees that, she really cares for someone else. She can put herself on the line for someone that's not even a blood relative, right? This sister is technically not a blood relative. She was adopted because her family did not think that they could have a daughter. They were having really bad luck getting a daughter, so they adopt this other little. They adopt this girl from an orphanage or whatever, but then shortly after, her existence comes into being. And there ends up being this redundancy where it's like, well, we kind of just adopted you because we didn't think we could have a daughter, but now that we do, we're kind of like, well, what do we do? And of course, in the original timeline, this girl is basically just bullied by the main character for being this adopted daughter. There's also like 3 brothers, but they're kind of just nothing burgers half the time. They just are there to just serve the plot. They don't really add much value. None of them are unique or anything. Really, in terms of characters in this series that are relevant, there's like 3 or 4-ish. There's, of course, the female lead. There's her sister. There's the male lead. And then there's... Well, the male lead is a prince, and then there's also another prince that's kind of serving as the villain, I guess, of this story. Basic idea there is he has some attachment to her, but it's before she reincarnated, so she doesn't really remember what the deal is. And the male lead, of course, has an attachment to her, so it's kind of like this situation where she actually likes the male lead for the most part. He's pretty kind and everything. Doesn't necessarily like the prince, so they end up fighting. Relatively typical with this kind of like fantasy storytelling and everything, so it's not really anything special. If I'm being honest here, all of the characters are pretty plain. The sister, who is the original female lead, is kind of just naive, just like that embodiment of innocence, you know? She doesn't really think ill of anyone. She is a little easy to trick, things like that. The male lead is kind of just like, oh, he's cold to other people except for the female lead, and isn't necessarily that attached to her at first, but slowly grows an attachment because she just, you know, is so impressive and kind and generous to her family, and he didn't really have a situation like that, but she is kind of saying that she'll support him because he is the original male lead, and she does, you know, in some ways like him. The prince is kind of just like the basic generic nasty character that's in love with the female lead, even though she's, you know, not really reciprocating those feelings. The basic gist with him is like they were not really childhood friends, but they were acquainted when they were younger, and it's like she didn't even like him then, but he grew like an attachment and everything, and it's kind of like, but he's kind of plain, and then, you know, she's fine. I mean, the basic idea is just, I'm going to help my sister, and that's about it. It doesn't really do much, frankly, in terms of, like, you know, forming her own way or whatever. Kind of just, I'm going to help my sister, and that's my character arc. I guess some other noteworthy things. I mean, the series progression-wise, there's a lot of time skips throughout the series, which is kind of interesting. Like, of course, we see her when she's originally reincarnated into this world. Then we skip ahead a little bit when she's already kind of formed a bond with her sister, and then we see a little bit of this era where they're, you know, dealing with some problems with their family, and this is the time in which the sister is kind of outed as being, you know, an adopted sibling to the three brothers, as mentioned before, and the female lead has to kind of get rid of that. And then there's another time skip to when they're like adults and they're starting to get pushed into high society and everything. You know, I kind of appreciate that, I guess, to a degree, you know, seeing like this progression of time. You don't really see that in a lot of stories. I mean, they kind of just go at their own pace, and then you end up wanting things to progress, but they don't. As far as like the progression between like the two, you know, younger periods of time, that one's pretty quick. I would say the more prevalent one is definitely this progression of time. But realistically, there's nothing special going on. It's a pretty generic story. Female lead protects her sister, and then a male lead, you know, has an interest in the female lead. But the female lead would, you know, expect the male lead to have an interest in the sister, but that doesn't happen, and then, you know, it's a pretty generic plot line, just, you know, a male proposed to me, right? Yeah, I mean, there's not really much to say. I guess I'll just, yeah, SAE. What is the SAE? Well, it's story, art, enjoyment. Story-wise, like, it's a 6. It's kind of plain. Not really much going on. Like, it's not bad. It's just, it's not doing anything special. It's just, no. I'm going to protect my sister, like I said, and then the male lead is changing his tune, and it's fine, but it doesn't really stand out. Art-wise, it's generically good, 7. It's quality art, it's just not very unique. I don't think the designs stand out to me, it's just kind of plain. Enjoyment-wise, between like a 6 and a 7. I think if you haven't read a million of these series, you'd probably give it like a 7, but if you have, then you'd probably give it a 6. So overall, I think my rating would be between a 6 and a 7. I think the story is just mid. It's probably like the most definitively weak part. The art, I mean, it's fine. You know, it's not going to impress you, I would say, but it's like not bad. It's just it's quality, but not doing anything special enough to get it to that 8, 9, 10 range. Enjoyment, you know, again, like I said, it kind of depends on you. I would probably fall more in like the 6 range here. It's just I've read a lot of stories similar to this that, you know, this yeah, so I mean, I between like a 6 and a 7 I think is relatively fair. If I was to lean one way or the other, I'd probably lean closer to a 6 than I would a 7. Again, I know I gave it a 7 at the start, but I'm just, you know, I'm being a little... I would give it a 7 if you haven't read a million of these stories, so that's kind of why I gave you that. Like, for me, it's a 6. It's doing everything fine, but it's not doing anything stand out, and that's kind of where it loses a lot for me. It just doesn't do anything that, like, would make me want to go back to this. But, anyway, I think that's about all I have to say. I'd appreciate if you could like, comment, subscribe, maybe leave another story you want me to read down below. Even if I've read it, I'll read it again. And, yeah, I'll see ya.